They showed up with a clipboard, a chainsaw, and a warning. Said my tree had 30 days, but what they didn't know was it had 100 years of roots, and I wasn't going to let them tear that down. I've lived in Maple Glen for decades. The street's grown since I first settled in. More homes, more rules, and more folks trying to control what used to be simple living. But one thing stayed constant: the giant oak tree in my front yard. That tree is older than me, older than any of the board members of the HOA that recently took over. My grandfather planted it. My children climbed it, and I sat under it just about every Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a grateful heart. That tree was family. So when I received a letter from the HOA stamped with bold red ink at the top reading violation notice, I thought it must have been a mistake. Obstruction to property line, unsafe root structure, immediate removal required. I stared at the paper in disbelief. I wasn't just surprised, I was downright insulted. That tree had stood longer than the sidewalk they claimed it threatened. I called the HOA office the next day, got their new president on the line, a woman named Tracy, but everyone called her Karen behind her back, for reasons you can guess. She didn't even bother to hear me out. Sir, it's a safety issue. We've had multiple complaints. From who? I asked. I can't disclose that, she said curtly, but you have 30 days to comply, or we'll issue fines and proceed with removal through city channels. That was the day I realized I wasn't dealing with neighbor guy, was dealing with bureaucrats with too much time and power. I walked outside, stood under the old oak, and laid my palm on its bark. The wind rustled its leaves like it always did, as if telling me not to worry. But I knew I had a battle ahead. I spent the next week digging through county records. Turns out, there's a protection act in the state for heritage trees, trees that meet certain age, size, and historical value criteria. My tree checked all 3 boxes. I contacted the county's historical society and an arborist, who confirmed it was likely over a century old. Next, I gathered photos, pictures of my kids swinging from the lowest branch in the 90s. My late wife reading under it in the early 2000s. I even found a newspaper clipping from 1972 featuring the tree in an article titled, "Oldest Tree in Maple Glen, Still Standing." I wasn't just defending a tree, I was defending a legacy. The next HOA meeting came around. I brought a folder full of documentation and went in wearing my best flannel and boots. Karen sat up front, clipboard in hand, flanked by a few board members who looked like they'd never touched soil in their life. I stood and told my story, showed the photos, shared the Heritage Tree Act, told them I was applying for landmark status through the county. And until that application was processed, no one was cutting anything. Karen rolled her eyes. "You're delaying the inevitable, Mr. Carter. If that tree falls, it could damage your neighbor's home. We're looking out for safety." "My neighbor?" I asked. "You mean Rob? The one who helped me hang Christmas lights from this tree last winter?" I turned toward Rob, who stood up and nodded. "That tree's part of this town," he said firmly. The room murmured in agreement. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of an engine outside, a woodcutter's truck, orange cones already placed, and a chainsaw being gassed up. I stormed out barefoot, waving my paperwork. "You don't have permission to do this," I shouted. "We were ordered by the HOA. The cutter replied. "Take it up with them." I called the sheriff's office and stood my ground beneath the tree until they arrived. The deputy told the workers to pack up until the legal matter was settled. That afternoon, I filed a temporary injunction with the county court. Karen had overstepped, and I wasn't letting it slide. While I waited for the court's response, support poured in. Neighbors I hadn't talked to in years dropped by with cookies and old photos under the oak. One woman brought a painting she'd done of the tree. Back in '88, a local high school art teacher started a petition to protect it. Within a week, it had over 500 signatures. The county's historical office called me back. They were expediting the review for landmark status. The official came out, took measurements, photos, and even interviewed me for their public archive. Meanwhile, Karen was fuming. I heard she tried to fine Rob for having an unapproved wind chime, just to prove she was still in charge. Then came the big day, the court hearing. I stood before the judge with my binder of evidence. Karen showed up with the HOA's legal rep, trying to argue that community safety took precedence over personal history. The judge flipped through the materials and stopped on a photo of my late wife under the tree. "Is this your wife?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said quietly. "She looks peaceful," he said, "and that tree looks like it belongs." With that, the judge ruled in my favor. The HOA was barred from removing the tree, and if my landmark status was approved, it would be protected permanently. By the end of the month, it was official. The tree was designated a protected historical landmark. Karen tried to appeal, but failed. Her reputation took a hit. At the next HOA election, she was voted out by a landslide. Rob became president. The first thing he did was write a clause into the HOA bylaws protecting trees of historical value. I still sit under that oak tree. Every Sunday, sometimes a neighbor joins me. Sometimes kids climb the branches. The roots run deep, not just in the ground, but in this community. I didn't just save a tree. I reminded people where we came from. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. More wild HOA tales are coming your way.